So whenever we're taking a split squat and making it more quad dominant, we're going to be looking at three main things, of which we will talk about in more detail soon. The first is going to be actually pushing the knee out past the toe so we can lengthen the quad. The second is going to be keeping our torso relatively upright. And the third is going to be moving like an escalator, not an elevator. Again, we'll go into more detail with those in just a bit. Now, I'm sure some of you have been told not to push your knee past the toe. It's bad for your knees, and that couldn't be further from the truth. We want to push the knee over the toe within reason while keeping our heel down so we can work on the quad muscles in a more lengthened position, and it's really good for your knee joint if we do it in the right way. And so when you watch how much knee flexion I get, how much knee I get past the toe, that might not be what yours looks like. It's about working with your individual mobility and making the most of what you have. Now, if you've been in the group for any length of time, I know you've seen many iterations of this exercise, but this setup that I'm gonna show you today is one that I'm very excited about, but I will talk about alternatives at the end if you don't feel like setting it up this way or if it's just not logistically practical for you. So when it comes to setting up this exercise, the first thing I want you to do is set up near a bench or the wall or a machine or a countertop or a pole or inside your squat rack where you can hold on to something, because I'm gonna want you to take one hand and hold on to something throughout the movement so we can decrease the balance and stability requirements of the movement. What I mean is that a lot of people, when they do this exercise and they get into the split stance, they feel like they're expending a lot of energy trying to balance, and by holding on with one arm, we can really get a much higher stability, higher quality movement, and I've experienced this a ton lately. Second is we want to elevate that front foot. I'm using a bumper plate. You can use a regular plate. You can use a stepper, anything in that 2 to 6 inch range, and you're going to put the wedge down on top of it. If you're using a plate to elevate your heel, that's fine, but some form of heel elevation is going to really help you with this. Next, when it comes to loading this exercise, because one of your hands is holding the bench, you're going to be loading this with a single dumbbell in your other hand, obviously. Now, I prefer to have that dumbbell in my back leg side, but truthfully, you could switch that and have it in your front leg side. I recommend trying both and just deciding what's more comfortable for you. That's really what matters the most. But truthfully, if this is your first time doing the exercise, I recommend putting the weight away and starting with just body weight and focus on executing the movement really well. As you'll see, it's pretty challenging, just body weight. If you do end up needing load for this movement, a lot of you will need some. I do recommend considering wearing a VersaGrip if this dumbbell gets quite heavy because you're only holding one of them. You know, instead of holding 220s, you might hold 130 or 135 or more than that. And if you feel like your grip is becoming a limiting factor, a VersaGrip can be really helpful to take that grip out of the equation. So now that you're all set up and you're ready to execute the movement, the first thing you might ask is, how long should your stride length be? How far back should this leg go? And the truth is, there's no perfect answer. The answer is whatever stride length allows you to drive the front knee out over the toe the most is going to be the stride length that you want to use. If I back this leg up too far, this left leg, it's going to prevent me from driving that front knee forward like I'd like to. And so play around with a couple different stride lengths and feel what feels best for you and allows you to actually push that knee over the toe the most. As far as where to put your foot on the wedge, I personally don't like putting my foot entirely on the wedge. I like having my toes a little bit on the flat surface. But the truth is, it doesn't really matter. There's no perfect answer. So again, experiment and see what feels best for you. Once you're in position here, again, we want to focus on those three things. We want to focus on staying relatively upright, driving the knee out over the toe, and moving like an escalator. And I'll show you what that means. An escalator moves on a diagonal, down and forward together, whereas an elevator would be moving straight up and down. We want to be moving down and forward like an escalator. And as you can see, I'm moving forward, letting that knee go out over the toe, and I'm using my free hand here just to keep some balance so that that balance component isn't tripping me up as I'm executing this movement. Staying nice and relatively upright. A little bit of a lean isn't the end of the world. These would be fine reps, but I do think if you can maintain a more upright torso and still get a lot of knee flexion over the toe, that would be something worthwhile doing. Staying upright, pushing that knee forward, and moving like an escalator down and forward into this position here. And you're only going as far down as you can keep your heel down. So if I keep going, if you guys watch, if I keep going at some point, my heel's gonna wanna lift up. I don't know if you can see that, but that's too much for me. And so if I move back a little bit, my heel can come down, and that's gonna be the end of the range for me. If you've never pushed the knee out over the toe, one thing I might recommend doing is when you're beginning the movement is just dropping down to a knee and pushing this knee forward and actually experiencing what this sort of a position feels like before you're actually getting into the exercise. And that's why I really do recommend starting with just body weight while you're getting used to the movement. Two other things I think are worth touching on. Number one is when you're getting into these really end ranges for the joints, like this is really end range knee flexion for me, you wanna be doing that gently. I don't wanna be going down and bouncing out of this position. You wanna go into that position nice and slow and nice and gentle and not bounce out of the bottom position. So get into this end range, this very lengthened position here, nice and soft, and try not to bounce out. Try and make sure you're doing everything under control. And number two is the back leg is absolutely going to be working. And so if you feel that back leg working, that's totally fine. That is part of the goal of the movement. Here are a few more good reps, and then we'll talk a little bit more about why we're doing what we're doing. And I do want to reiterate, if you're at home with the squat rack, I do like setting up facing in on the squat rack so you can switch quickly between arms, between sets. You don't have to change any of the setup. You can just change and hold on to the corresponding part of your squat rack. So now that we've talked through the execution and how to go about performing the movement, let's talk about why we're doing some of what we're doing from a setup perspective. And I just want to start off by saying, if this setup is something that just isn't logistically feasible, you are very welcome to do this movement with 2 dumbbells, 1 in each hand, with both feet on the floor, as long as you have some heel elevation. And I'm going to show you guys a clip of what that might look like now. So while we're on that topic, why are we elevating the front foot? And the truth is, this exercise, the main goal of this exercise is to get the most knee flexion that you could get compared to any other quad dominant movement that we're doing, comparing to your leg press or your back squat or a different sort of lunge pattern or a step up. This is an exercise where we have the opportunity to get the most knee flexion, and so we should capitalize on that, in my opinion. And one of the ways to capitalize on that is to elevate the front foot. Now, what does elevating the front foot do? Technically, it does 2 things. Number one is it makes the front leg have to work a little bit less hard. Now, why is that helpful? It's helpful because by making it a little bit easier on the front leg, the majority of people are going to find it easier to actually focus on pushing that knee further, because instead of this being 90% of the work on my front leg and maybe 10% of work on the back, maybe it's 80% on the front leg, 20% on the back. And so by reducing the work that this leg has to do by just a little bit, we can get a little bit more range of motion, which is really a primary goal of this movement. If we were looking for the biggest quad stimulus that we could possibly get, we'd go into something like a leg press or a back squat, or something where we had a little bit higher stability. Right now, we're looking for a lot of range of motion, a lot of knee flexion, and deloading the front leg is one helpful way to do that. The second reason that elevating the front foot can be helpful is some people with both feet on the ground are gonna find that their back knee touches the floor too early, and that they could get further forward, but they can't go down anymore because this back leg hits the floor. So by elevating that front leg, we can get a little bit more range of motion down here, and we can get inevitably a little bit more knee flexion up here. So it works in 2 ways. Now, why are we holding on? Again, we talked about the balance component. A lot of people who have done this movement have experienced that they're spending a lot of energy trying to remain balanced and not fall on their face. And so by holding on, you're better able to remain balanced, to remain upright and focus on the actual exercise that you're doing instead of trying to, not fall on your face. Again, if you can't find something to elevate the front foot, you can do it with both feet on the ground as long as your front heel is elevated, but I do recommend still setting it up with something where you're holding 1 dumbbell and you're holding on with the other arm. But again, if you don't feel like doing that and you can execute the movement perfectly well with 2 dumbbells, not holding on, you're more than welcome to. To be honest, this setup has actually changed the game for me. This has quickly become an exercise that I really enjoy in my programming because it's a little bit higher stability and I don't have to focus so much on falling over, and I can just get into the movement, execute it well, high degree of control, high degree of stability, and I can get that knee flexion that we really want to get out of this exercise, because there are other movements like your squats, even the foam roller hack, even regular hack squats, where you're going to get a lot of knee flexion, but not quite like this. And it's rare that you're ever going to be working the back leg, rec fem, and hip flexor like you are in this exercise. And you guys will absolutely be feeling this back leg work. And that is part of the equation. We do want it to work. And so it's quite a unique exercise. And to get the most out of it, we really want to be maximizing range of motion. And I believe by elevating the front foot, elevating the front heel, and holding on to something, we can accomplish that the best.